You are listening to the Keeping It Juicy podcast.
Your main squeeze in nutrition.
Don't forget to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for a brand new episode.
Also, don't forget to add us on Instagram and Facebook at Keeping It Juicy Podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome to episode 76, the plate of food you never asked for. Today we're going to be diving into, if you haven't guessed already, the MyPlate guidelines and a little bit of the history of our U.S. dietary guidelines, as well as some things that other countries are doing, and obviously our opinion on it.
Right? So, but before we do go into that, we're going to do our new nutrition in the news. So the name of this article is Our Ability to Focus May Falter After Eating One Meal High in Saturated Fat. And it actually goes a little bit into studying the effect of leaky gut as well. I thought this was really interesting because we always talk about having afternoon naps or feeling sluggish after we eat a plate of food, and I'll go into it. But basically, it talks about how fatty food may feel like a friend during these troubled times of COVID-19. So some new research came out that suggested that eating one meal high in saturated fat can actually hinder our ability to concentrate. So it's not great news for people whose diets have basically gone south while they're working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic. This specific study actually compared how 51 women, I don't know women specifically, but the study said women, performed on a test of the attention after they ate either a meal high in saturated fat or the same meal made with sunflower oil, which is high in unsaturated fat. So their performance on the test was actually worse after eating the highest saturated fat meal than after they ate the meal containing the healthier fat. So basically it signaled a link between the fatty food and the brain, which we kind of talked about that relationship before in previous episodes. And researchers were also looking at whether a condition called leaky gut, which allows intestinal bacteria to enter the bloodstream, had any effect on concentration. So actually participants with leakier guts performed worse on the attention assessment no matter which meal that they had eaten. The high-fat meal actually was eggs, biscuits, turkey sausage, and gravy containing about 60 grams of fat. So either a palmitic acid-based oil high in saturated fat or the lower saturated fat sunflower oil. So both meals totaled around 930 calories. That's a fuck ton of calories. And were designed to mimic the contents of various fast food meals, such as a Burger King double Whopper with cheese or a McDonald's Big Mac with medium fries. So they were trying to mimic that effect. And the findings suggested concentration could be even more impaired in people stressed by the pandemic who are turning to fatty food for comfort. So, what we now know is that when people are more anxious, a good amount of us will find high saturated fat foods a lot more enticing than broccoli. So we know from other research that depression and anxiety can interfere with concentration and attention as well. So keep that in mind. So when we add that on top of a high fat meal, we could expect the real world effects to be even larger. So I thought this was a pretty interesting study because we already see this trend going on right now.
I think it's interesting. I mean, we also know that when you eat like a very high carb meal, there's that insulin effect as well. 930 calories, a good portion of that probably had to be carbohydrates as well, depending on, the age of these women, how much they weigh. 930 calories is a pretty good chunk. We're both pretty small-ish sized women. That would put me on my butt for a while. Like I'd be tired after eating a big meal with eggs, biscuits, turkey sausage, and gravy. I wonder why they made it such a large meal.
They're trying to mimic that, like if people went to McDonald's or some other fast food place during this time, I think they were just trying to go for that effect.
Yeah.
And
Why not just use fast food meals for the study then?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, you can actually reference a study in our show notes to get some more information on that. But
Yes, let us know your thoughts on this. But yeah, go ahead and read the study. We do have it in our show notes and the link in our bio. With that being said, we are going to move on to the bulk of the episode, which is all about the ever-changing food guidelines that we've had here in the US. We'll get into some other countries a little bit, but if you've been around for a while, you've probably noticed that our food guidelines have changed over the years. Growing up, I remember the pyramid. We'll get into what was maybe preceding that and what's going on now. And it pretty much, our food guidelines involves everything from food lobbying to food industries to policy changing, and then just the additional outside influence as well. So let's take, for example, the US Department of Agriculture's 1991 withdrawal of the Eat Right Pyramid Food Guide. They did so in response from pressure from meat and dairy producers. And at that time, this was only the latest in a long series of industry attempts to influence federal dietary recommendations. Such attempts began when diet-related health problems in the United States shifted in prevalence from nutrient deficiencies to chronic diseases, and dietary advice shifted from eat more to eat less. The pyramid controversy focuses on attention on the conflict between federal protection and the rights of food lobbyists to act in their own self-interest and federal responsibility to promote the nutritional health of the public. It's an interesting dynamic because on one side of the spectrum, we have American people trying to exercise their right, but then we have Americans on the other end screaming, guide us. Kind of a controversy if you think about it, and it still goes on today, really, no matter what the subject. There's kind of a spectrum, people on both ends. You can think of our mask issue right now. People don't want to wear masks because it's
right,
against their rights and give me my rights back. But then you have some people on the other end saying, like, you're not protecting us enough. So
right.
the
So,
food guidelines are just another example of that.
and I'm sure if we talk about different countries, that we'll see a completely different perspective on all of this. But because we're in America, there's so many different minds and different perspectives on a lot of things. So to keep it moving forward, basically since 1977, for example, under pressure from meat producers, believe it or not, federal dietary advice has evolved from actually decreased consumption of meat to having 2 to 3 daily servings. So that's a big jump. And this recent incident also kind of highlights the inherent conflict of interest in the Department of Agriculture's dual mandates to promote U.S. agricultural products and to advise the public about food healthy choices, like we just said. I mean, granted, we don't want to get too political in this episode, but you can't help notice how much things have changed. And there's a fuck ton that goes into like what shapes our guidance systems today. Not that they're wrong by any means, because there's still research that's still conducted to put these guidance out. But it's important to use it as a guideline. That's literally all it is. And to really take it with a grain of salt, because no actual guideline will meet every single person. That just doesn't make any sense. If you're in a field of nutrition, you understand everybody has their own unique specific needs. I mean, before you even ask me, no, dietitians are not influenced by food lobbyists or food industries, because I know that's something that might call into a lot of people might call into question, because these food guidance systems are influenced slightly. Um, my particular education has had a huge variety that did not depend on food industries, so you can lose that argument right there. And now, before we move forward with the rest of this episode, and if you are more interested along the food politics and how everything changed, if you want way more detail, please refer to this book called Food Politics by Marion Nestle, who has a PhD in nutrition and spent a lifetime working in the field of nutrition and its government counterparts. I mean, I personally love that book. Like, I kind of nerded out in that book. So if you're really interested in all the things that went into it, please feel free to look at it. And it'll give me way more information. So that's just my personal.
Absolutely. So let's kind of dive into how these guidelines have changed over the years. But did y'all know that before the pyramid, we had the food wheel? So we will have in the show notes all of the pictures of the different guidelines over the years. Um, so keep in mind that other guidelines did come before the wheel, but for simplicity's sake, we'll keep it short. The wheel actually came out in 1984, and some of you may not have been around to remember. I definitely wasn't. And it was basically, it emphasized a pattern for daily choices. It was a total diet approach, and it included goals for both nutrition adequacy and moderation. 5 food groups and amounts form the basis for the food guide pyramid. So it kind of took the groups, but they're in a wheel. And daily amounts of food were provided at 3 calorie levels. And it was actually first illustrated for a Red Cross nutrition course as this food wheel.
I just find it so funny that we even had a wheel in our history.
I mean, it's just really confusing. A lot of people today still don't understand fully what a calorie is. So
hmm
I can't imagine back in 1984,
hmm
comprehension on what a calorie was much better.
It was not
Um, that's just, I could imagine that it would be extremely confusing back then. And
right.
if you look at the picture, they have like utensils next to the wheel too. So was it a plate or was it a wheel?
I don't know. I think they could have gone with the MyPlate ideal, but I think the food wheel just sounds more appealing. I don't know the whole reason for it, but I think they keep changing it because it also basically it was very confusing, and I know they tried to make it easier, which that really depends on who you ask as the years go by.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, when we think of a circle, we think of like, or at least I think of like, a pie graph or something, it equals 100%. So in my mind, these are the proportions that my daily intake should equal 100%. I don't know. Like if you look at when people look at, okay, what percentage of your calories are coming from carbs, those are all kind of like wheels. So
Right.
I don't know.
I don't know. But we'll definitely attach a picture in the show notes and you guys let us know how you feel about that.
Mm-hmm.
But so the next one that we're going to go into actually came out in 1992. So this is the first one that I personally remember. I mean, for the rest of us, that may not be the case, but it kind of it kind of went from a wheel to let's go to a triangle because that won't confuse people. And there were the whole reasoning for it is because it was trying to show like a total diet approach, and they included goals for both nutrient adequacy and moderation this time. And they developed this using consumer research to bring awareness of new food patterns that are coming about. And the actual illustration focused on concepts of variety, moderation, and proportion. So that was something new. And then it also includes visualization of added fats and sugars throughout the 5 food groups and in the tip of the food pyramid. And it also included ranges for the daily amounts of food across all 3 calorie levels, which the 3 calorie levels are still, I'm not the biggest fan of, but I don't know. We'll attach the picture in the show notes too, but this is the first one I remember learning about.
Oh yeah, I definitely remember seeing this, and I remember first being taught this in like first or second grade. Like this is the first time I remember seeing it, and I remember seeing that you could have 6 to 11 servings of grains per day. And, you know, little kid me who didn't understand what a serving size was, because what kid understands what a serving size was. I vividly remember like one night my mom made like spaghetti, and I was determined to eat 6 plates of spaghetti because that's what I thought 6 to 11 servings was. And you know, that's that's my first memory of this food pyramid, is just thinking I needed to eat all of that food. And trust me, I definitely tried.
Like,
So
That's
But,
so funny.
you know, it's they clearly didn't teach the food pyramid very well. And what's even more confusing about like putting these foods into groups as well is, you have your breads, your grains, and your cereals in
Hmm.
this, but a lot of people don't really understand sometimes where foods fall into categories. Thinking back to, my childhood, it was very common to always have like pancakes or muffins or blueberry muffins or a coffee cake like with breakfast. Is
Hmm.
that a bread or is that a sweet at the top of the pyramid? Me
Right.
growing up thought that was a staple. It's not a staple. That falls at the top of the pyramid because it's like a sweet thing,
Hmm.
when in reality, I was thinking it falls at the bottom because it was a daily thing. And
Right.
this doesn't teach you, okay, a
Right.
blueberry muffin is not, a bread because it has a lot of added fat and a lot of added sugar too. It's basically a cupcake. And
Right.
this doesn't help you
No.
learn that.
Actually, when I was growing up, like occasionally we had the pancake, but my true staple was like Fruit Loops. Fruit Loops, Fruity Pebbles, all of that stuff, Cocoa Puffs. And I mean, that's in the bread and cereal group, but what about like the extra whole bunch of added sugar with it? It's like you don't really think about it. And then you had the milk on top of that. And who knows?
Another two staples I remember eating as a kid, very common, were um, Rice Krispies. But
Remember that.
but it was a thing in my family, everyone, I don't know, I don't know when this stopped, but you always had sugar on the table, salt, pepper, sugar. Those were always on the table. You
Yeah.
would add extra sugar
I
on
would
top,
add sugar too.
and then you drink the milk at the bottom, and you'd have like 4 tablespoons at the bottom. As a kid, that was fine. That wasn't added sugar. That was one of my 6 servings.
Mhm.
Another thing I had as a kid for breakfast was oatmeal, but it was started off as those like Quaker flavored ones, the whatever apple cinnamon, maple brown sugar. But
Right.
again, there was always sugar on the table, and there'd be a big slab of butter on top of my oatmeal. So not only was the
Right.
oatmeal pre-sweetened from whatever Quaker added to it, there was sugar on the table, brown sugar, and butter. But that was my staple, that's the picture of the oatmeal at the bottom. I had oatmeal. I was fine.
Right. And I also remember this is bringing back all sorts of memories. But my mom would make malto meals and she'd add cocoa. Yeah, those like big old, it's like grits, but not really. Like if I have you never had malto meals? It's like I don't know even know what's in it. I forgot. I'm sure if I can look it up. But basically it was similar to grits, but not the same texture. So basically, she would make a huge pot of the malto meals and add like cocoa powder to it, and then she would place it in my bowl, and I'd add more sugar on top of it, and then I just mix it, and it'd be just one bowl of bullshit. So I don't know.
A big bowl of bullshit. That was my oatmeal. That was that was what I ate as a kid. Big big bowl of bullshit. Oh man.
Oh man,
So
that's like the second topic of this episode, a big bowl of bullshit.
the food pyramid done fucked us up, basically. Why we became nutrition majors. Thank you, food pyramid. Anyways, so then in 2005, they had the bright idea of revamping the food pyramid. Um, Personally, I was thrown off by this, if you couldn't tell that we were thrown off by the first one as well. So it was known as the My Pyramid Food Guidance System. It was introduced along with an updating of the food guide pyramid patterns for the 2005 dietary guidelines for Americans, including daily amounts of food at 12 different calorie levels. Um, better than 3, but last time I checked, everyone has their own calorie needs, and that also changes like on a daily basis depending on how much you do. So 12 is kind of putting us all into these boxes. So it continued the pyramid concept based on consumer research, but a simplified illustration. And there was detailed information provided on the website mypyramid.gov, and it did add a band for oils and the concept of physical activity, which was pretty new until this point. And the illustration could be used to describe a variety of concepts, including variety, moderation, and proportion. And then the little dude was like climbing up the stairs to again illustrate physical
Right.
activity.
So basically, this is the first one that they actually attached a website to.
With the internet growing in popularity and whatnot by that point.
So I mean, I wasn't the biggest fan of this. I was just pyramids in general confuse me. Like I think it should stay with the Egyptians. So
I mean, I do think this one was a little bit better as I look at it. I like that it took off the servings because
yeah.
that just confuses people.
Hmm.
But and we'll get into this more with like my plate too, but sometimes not every meal is going to have a grain, a vegetable, a fruit, and a protein source.
Hmm.
It's just not like so putting this into actual practice and like what a full day looks like, there's just a big gap there, you know?
Right. Right. Well, with that being said, now, if you don't already know it, we're sitting here with the MyPlate. So it was introduced along with updating of the USDA food patterns for the 2010 dietary guidelines for Americans, which I think that's updated every 10 years, but that's a topic for another episode. So basically, this time they want to do a different shape to help grab the consumer's attention with the visual cue, with a new visual cue. And basically, this is supposed to be kind of like an icon that serves as a reminder for healthy eating and not intended to provide specific messages. So I thought that was neat. And the visual is linked to food and is a familiar mealtime type of symbol in consumers' minds, which it does show off to be pretty familiar. And they did this through testing of subset of people before they actually put this out onto the market. And they also included the use of from the My Pyramid to kind of give a sense of personalization approach. So I thought that was really neat and interesting. They have a website attached to this too. It's okay. I think it's Super Tracker is linked to this. Am I
Super
right?
Tracker is no more.
No. So what we've learned in school is completely obsolete right now.
It's gone.
What the fuck?
Mhm.
Should we even be teaching nutrition anymore? What the fuck? We haven't even been out of school for that long, or college that long.
Super Tracker is no more.
Damn.
Mhm.
So for all you young kids that don't know what Super Tracker is, I say young kids, only a couple of years, but basically it was kind of like the MyFitnessPal of that was linked to this MyPlate deal where you could
It
look
was
up food.
like a it was like so the USDA has a USDA food database, but if you've ever looked at that, it
Right,
is a beast. It's even as a nutrition major, it can be pretty confusing. There's like food codes and it's
right, right,
different serving. It's not user friendly. It's just not. Um, Super Tracker was the user friendly general public version of the USDA food database. So you could log your meals and it basically you'd have the goals. If you've ever used MyFitnessPal, you have your calorie and macronutrient goals. But with Super Tracker, you had your cups goals, two
right,
different cups of vegetables, whatever goal for protein, whatever goal for fruit. and grains, whole grains as well.
Right.
So that's how you tracked your progress and,
Hmm.
saw the quality of your diet was through how close you got to those cups, ounces goals versus MyFitnessPal, your goals are calories and number.
Right. Well, I
But
mean,
it's gone, so it doesn't matter anymore.
I guess they had to ditch the whole idea because there wasn't enough traffic, but that's okay because there'll always be something new. So,
You're
I mean,
taking this very well.
I mean, I mean, like, in all honesty, with nutrition and how the government influences and food lobbyists and how much the food guidance has changed over the years, I can't expect anything less. So, what's next is the question, but I don't know. Like I said,
Yeah.
it's just going to be constantly ever evolving. And as long as there's food politics and food
Mhm.
industries and research involved, it's going to keep changing. That's just how it is.
Mhm.
And like I said, when you look at these, you have to take it with a grain of salt because that's not going to be 100% for you. If you want
Mhm.
something that's 100% for you, then I'm going to say go see a dietitian or go see another healthcare professional. Don't
Exactly.
don't just rely on this.
Right.
And I mean, I don't think these companies realize that, I don't know, with the MyPlate, my thing with MyPlate is yes, it has a lot of good things with it, but at the same time, I don't think they realize that a lot of people don't eat on regular plates anymore. So there's always going to be issues with either of these guidance systems, but I kind of like I like it, but I kind of have had to teach my clients the my plate in different ways to think about things because people are always eating on the go and whatnot.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
with that being said, I feel like this is going to change again. I mean, it came out in 2011, we're in 2020, so who knows? Within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see another change easily.
Yeah, and kind of what I alluded to when we were talking about the My Pyramid, it's great to have these guidelines, but like you mentioned, people aren't sitting down and eating off a plate all the time. Like
Hmm.
I probably only do that. Well, now more because I'm home all the time.
Right,
But in the real world, maybe only twice, give or take. Sometimes it's out of a Tupperware.
hmm,
Sometimes it's a shake or smoothie of some shape or form.
right,
Sometimes it's a bar of some shape or form. Sometimes it's carrot sticks and hummus. Like that doesn't have my dairy group in it. That
right,
doesn't really have my grain group in it. That definitely doesn't have my fruit group in it. But does that mean it's not a healthful snack? Absolutely not. So
right,
it's kind of this, it's a guide, it's the guidelines, but it's a missing link between, okay, how can I take this guideline and build it into a total day?
right.
Um, and I think it confuses a lot of people to having dairy on there as the fluid choice.
Yeah, I
It
don't like
upsets a lot of people. I mean, from a general public perspective, I can see how it's very confusing. They can think like, oh, well, I heard dairy is bad for me. I heard milk is bad for me. But then, do I have to have dairy to have a complete diet? It's like, no, you need calcium and vitamin
that.
D, which you can get from all your other food groups as well. And
Right,
again,
and it's
looking at this picture doesn't teach you that.
right, and it's not just dairy. It's also like soy milk and other
Right.
types of milks.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're trying to use My Plate Guide to kind of reference, like, kind of tell you, hey, you need to go on the internet because apparently, if you go onto the myplate.gov, if you click on each category, it goes into more detail. But a lot of people aren't, let's say, motivated enough to do that. So,
Yeah, yeah, which I completely see from a perspective as well. It is a little bit confusing. And
right,
again, seeing this guideline doesn't help me see how I should be eating for an entire day.
right,
Of course, you could have 3 meals a day that fit this, little visualization they give, but how sustainable is that for most people?
right. I
Not.
don't know. It's just, you'll have to. put your own twist to it. Like, for example, with my
Mm-hmm.
bariatric patients, I kind of tell them, I kind of twist my plate a little bit. I'm like, okay, let's kick the dairy out. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, let's look at this. What can you do with this?
Mm-hmm.
Grains, okay. Let's say you're on the go. Let's add 2 slices of bread. That's your grains right there. You want some protein? Let's add a deli meat or some
Mm-hmm.
sort of plant-based protein to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's your protein.
Mm-hmm.
Want to add some vegetables? Add spinach and lettuce. There you go. So that's just kind of how I teach it. So that's just my own twist to it, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
hoping they'll change this even more,
Mm-hmm.
uh, so it can be more representative of to-go meals. But that's just how I personally do it to help put it into perspective for people to include a whole variety of food.
Right,
So,
right. And kind of my take on this too is, when I'm first working with someone, usually vegetable intake is where we need to start. I
mhm,
really focus on, how can we easily just get more vegetables into the meals you're already eating? And that's usually a pretty good start. And most people know they need to be eating more vegetables. It's just a matter of how we're going to get those in
right,
and make it kind of cohesive with what you're already doing so that it's mildly, like, to an extent, like, undetectable, so it doesn't
mhm,
feel like you're changing a bunch of things at once.
right,
um, with that being said, there's a huge influx of the whole intuitive eating.
mhm,
Will we see this as the dietary guidelines in the future? We will see. It was a big step for physical activity to be included in nutritional guidelines. If you think about it, that was probably a really big thing back in the day. People, at one point needed to think about those two being together. So we'll kind of see, will intuitive eating make its way into actual federal guideline recommendations
right.
for things?
It's more interesting than you think.
And more importantly, let's dive into a little bit on what other countries are doing. So we'll first start off with Canada. So they actually also have a three-part plate, but they do emphasize eating a variety of healthy foods each day. Their three-part plate has fruits and vegetables as one category, protein foods as another category, and then whole grain foods as another category. The Canada plate emphasizes making water your drink of choice, which is nice to see. It also emphasizes that being healthy is more than what's on your plate, which is a really nice thought that I like that they added in there.
Right. So that's really nice. And then let's go down a little south to Mexico. And what? I'm just going geographically here. So basically, the current guidelines for Mexico is a plate divided into 3 parts. Again, we're seeing that here. And each one represents a food group. So we have vegetables and fruits together. And then we have cereals, legumes, and animal source foods. So including dairy, meat, poultry, and fish. And the plate has a band around it with a different color for each group. So green for vegetables and fruits, yellow for cereals, and red for legumes and animal products. So there is a message to combine between the red and yellow bands, so intended to make people combine these two specific groups. So that's the cereals, and the legumes and animal products that we're talking about, which is an interesting take. So I don't know.
I find it interesting, and it makes sense why they include dairy with the same food group as like your meat, poultry, and fish. Because
Right.
when you think about it, the animal sources are very high protein. Dairy does have a good amount of protein as well. But here in the US, we think of dairy as its own food group. So interesting
I'm
to see.
gonna assume the dairy industry played a part in that, but that's just me.
Just a guess. Just a guess. So now we're gonna take a little trip a little bit farther. We're gonna go to Japan now. So this one was new to me. They actually utilize a spinning top as their food guide. It's basically an inverted pyramid, and the Japanese food guide is again a spinning top designed to resemble the well-known Japanese traditional toy, which is apparently a spinning top. I didn't know that. It's a rotating inverted cone divided from top down into food group layers that depict foods primarily cooked in their traditional dishes. The order of the food groups is given by the recommended daily servings. Again, kind of takes me back to our food pyramid with the 6 servings of grains that fucked me up. Um, at the top, there are dishes including salads, cooked vegetables, and soups. And then we have fish, eggs, and meat dishes more with the less amount of servings. And then at the bottom is actually milk and fruit, which I found really interesting that they kind of, fruit is a lower priority than we have here in the States.
Right.
And then there's actually a person running at the top making speed, like making the top spin, signifying the importance of physical activity to enjoy good health. The guide also recommends drinking plenty of water or tea and to moderate consumption of highly processed snacks, confectionery, and sugar sweetened beverages. Again, something similar that we've seen on our food pyramid as well, but there can always be confusion as what qualifies something as a processed snack. Um, there can be confusion sometimes.
Right.
The food guide is accompanied by a chart that indicates the recommended daily servings for each food group and an illustration with examples of foods and dishes to meet the recommendations.
Oh, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So each country has its own fun little twist. I love it. It's like traveling for those that are isolated.
It was interesting. I never a spinning top. It's see, to me that's extremely confusing. If our food pyramid wasn't confusing enough, now you invert it. I don't know.
You invert it and you spin it and you fuck shit up.
And you run on it, I don't know anymore.
Oh man.
We should.
But so the next country that we're gonna go into, which are you guys surprised by this? It's for Turkey. So so Turkey's a little bit weird with this. So Tur- Turkey's food guide is a 4-leaf clover, not a circle, not a pyramid. It's a clover. Uh, and it's divided into 4 basic food groups. So milk and dairy, meat, eggs, fish, legumes, and seeds, vegetables and fruit, and bread and cereal, which, I mean, I think they're trying to shout Mediterranean diet at you from this perspective.
Mhm.
And the use of the clover is actually pretty symbolic because in Turkey it symbolizes happiness,
Oh, that's
and
cute. That's nice.
it is nice. But But in addition, the leaves are actually heart shaped as well, suggesting health and love.
Y'all
So
are
that's
so cute. We should have a clover.
a clover.
Yeah, the
I
US should get a clover. This is
don't
nice.
think people. I don't think people would appreciate it like you and I do.
I know. Probably not.
But so the bottom half of the circle is surrounded by the statement adequate and balanced nutrition. And above there are olive branches, which symbolizes peace and makes a reference to olive oil. So a very, like I said, very important component to the Mediterranean diet. And as we know, Mediterranean diet is super
Yes,
healthy. Um,
absolutely.
so this is nice. I don't know if it would go over well here. Like
Right.
all of these food pyramids and guidance systems, I don't know. I don't know if it would go over well in other countries, but
The one like kind of issue I suppose I have with how these food groups are divided is you have meat, eggs, fish, legumes, and seeds all in one group, which
mhm,
for countries that have less processed food, that's fine. But to me, this kind of screams the United States obsession with like peanut butter. People here, peanut butter is like a good source of protein and they shovel it in. And that is a very calorie dense, high fat food. And
yeah,
if we put meat and peanut butter in the same category here, in the US, I could see that being very problematic. Yes, peanut butter does have some protein, but one,
right,
it's not as bioavailable, which is fine. You can do protein pairings and get your complete proteins that way as well. But calorie for calorie, it's going to be a little bit of a problem. Because you can down 5 tablespoons of peanut butter without thinking very much.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, sometimes you need something extreme to make a change.
What do you mean?
I don't know. I mean, so clover might seem nice and happy in Turkey, but if you slap that on to American food guidance system, people might just think that you're turning it into Ireland. I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like,
They're like, so I can eat more Lucky Charms.
oh my God, see? Look,
Oh,
um,
Americans.
turning everything into a childish game.
Pretty much.
That's but but that was a fun trip around the world. If you didn't want to, if you wanted to take a trip, well, here you are. We
You
took
wanted to
you to
travel this summer. You're welcome.
4 countries, all in 20 minutes. But nonetheless, it's interesting, and I actually want to look at some more countries' food guidance systems now. I just might nerd out after this, but
It just makes me wonder, are these guides actually working? I don't know.
there's
Um,
there's a lot at play. I mean, there's
yeah.
also like a lot of political, environmental factors that play into this as well,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
just a lot more that we can't really even talk about, or it's beyond what we know enough of, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and we did not even mention, the whole cultural aspect of food and what meal times, represent. Here in the US, it's a lot of go, 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 but meal times in Europe and per country in Europe are very, very different. I'm sure
Right,
you can even attest to just how meal times are different for your family,
right,
being from Turkey. It's very different.
right. I mean, I had family come over from Turkey to America, and they kept saying, "You guys literally don't stop. Like, you guys just don't sit still." And I'm like, "What do you mean? I just sat with you for an hour. That's not long enough." I'm like,
Like, I gotta go.
that's just not
Yeah.
their perspective. And
Yeah.
then I don't know. It
Hmm.
just says a lot about where you live and who you're surrounded by and everything. So,
Yeah. Culture is very much at play here as well.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And well, with that being said, let us know your thoughts and feelings about this entire episode. Um, and to help close out the episode, we're going to talk about our social media shout out of the week. So, social media shout out of the week does go to keeping up with the dietitian, underscores in between all those words. And she is a clinical dietitian with a thing for cooking.
Mhm.
And basically, she just has plates of foods and all extra good stuff on her page. So we do appreciate you supporting us, and we notice you guys.
We
So
see y'all.
if you want to be a if you want to be our next social media shout out, definitely give us a shout, like our stuff, comment, do something. We'll notice you.
All that fun stuff. Just do something. All right, guys. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Keeping It Juicy podcast.
Your main squeeze in nutrition.
Don't forget to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for a brand new episode.
Also, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Keeping It Juicy Podcast.
We'd love to hear from you, so please leave us a review
5 stars, no less.
on whatever platform you're listening to, or send us an email at keepingitjuicypodcast@gmail.com.
Or if you have any topics you'd like for us to touch upon, shoot us an email. Until next time, don't do anything that I wouldn't do. So it continued the pyramid concept based on consumer research, but a simplified illustration. What the fuck was that? I think a bird just tried to fly. What the fuck are you doing? I think a bird just tried to fly in to here. Wiping your windows too clean.
Scared me.
Focus.
Okay.